We all know the story, right? April 14th, 1912. The unsinkable Titanic hits an iceberg and sinks on its maiden voyage. But that's not the whole story, not even close. The iceberg, it turns out, was just the final push. The real story, based on some incredible forensic evidence, is about a series of fatal flaws, bad decisions, and just plain rotten luck that doomed the ship before it ever left the shore. So let's get right into it. The real question isn't that it sank, but why it went down so incredibly fast. I mean, just over 2 hours for the most advanced ship in the world? The answer isn't really out there in the freezing Atlantic. Nope. It starts on the drawing board with a whole cascade of failures that began years earlier. So Section 1 is all about how this ship was, in some ways, designed for disaster. The very first links in this chain of failure were forged long before the ship even touched water. In the race to build the most luxurious liner ever, some absolutely critical safety features were compromised. And you can see the trade-offs right here. It's actually kind of shocking. On one hand, the demand was for a grander, more open staircase for the first-class passengers. The consequence? They had to lower the height of the watertight bulkheads, the very things designed to stop the ship from flooding. Then they wanted a nice, wide, uncluttered deck for a stroll. The consequence of that? They slashed the number of lifeboats from a planned 48 down to just 16. Aesthetics literally won out over safety. Look at that number, 1,178. That's it. That is the absolute maximum number of people those lifeboats could hold. But there were 2,224 people on board, so right from the start, it was a mathematical certainty that if something went terribly wrong, more than 1,000 people were simply out of luck. So you're probably asking, how on earth was that legal? Well, this quote explains it perfectly. The ships had gotten 4 times bigger, but the safety regulations hadn't changed at all. They were dangerously out of date. It meant the Titanic could set sail with a catastrophic shortage of lifeboats and still be 100% legal. Okay, so we've got a seriously flawed vessel. Now, in Section 2, we're going to see how it was put on a direct collision course. This part of the story is all about ignored warnings, a series of human errors, and some truly terrible luck that put the ship and one very specific iceberg on a collision course in the middle of the night. This timeline is just chilling to read. It shows a complete breakdown of communication. Warnings are streaming in all day long. One critical warning is handed to the chairman of the company, Bruce Ismay, who apparently just sticks it in his pocket. Another is completely ignored by a wireless operator who was too busy sending telegrams for the passengers. The most important warnings never even get to the captain, so the guys on the bridge are steaming ahead completely in the dark. And it gets worse. The ship was going way too fast, nearly full speed, into an area they knew was full of ice. So why didn't the lookouts see the iceberg sooner? Well, get this. Because of a last-minute crew change, an officer was reassigned, and he accidentally walked off the ship with the key to the locker where the binoculars were kept. The lookouts were left trying to spot icebergs with their naked eyes on a calm, moonless night, the absolute worst conditions imaginable. Meanwhile, the iceberg itself was on this crazy, improbable 2-year journey. See, a cold current was acting like a bodyguard, pushing it hundreds of miles further south than it should have gone, and protecting it from the warm water that would have melted it. It was this total fluke of nature that guided a mountain of ancient ice right into the busiest shipping lane in the world. Now, even with all of that, survivors said the collision was just a gentle shudder. So how did that cause so much damage? Okay, let's get to Section 3, the Achilles heel. This is where the forensic evidence comes in, the final hidden piece of the puzzle that reveals the ship's fatal weakness. This piece of testimony from a fireman who was deep in the ship was the first major clue. He didn't say there was a giant gash. He described seeing water pouring in between the ship's steel plates. The seams themselves had failed. The ship was literally coming apart. And that was the question that haunted investigators for decades. Why would a brand new, state-of-the-art steel ship just burst at the seams from a glancing blow? Well, that question led scientists to look at the very things holding the hull together, the 3 million rivets. And what they found changed everything. This discovery was just astonishing. Turns out the builders used 2 different kinds of rivets. In the middle of the ship, they used strong steel rivets put in by a huge hydraulic machine. But at the bow and the stern, where the machine couldn't fit, they switched to weaker wrought iron rivets that had to be hammered in by hand. And the iceberg hit the ship in the exact spot where they used the weaker rivets. But wait, it gets even worse. When they analyzed rivets recovered from the wreck, they found the shipyard had used a cheaper, lower-grade iron for the bow. This stuff was full of something called slag impurities. Think of it like little bits of glassy junk trapped inside the metal. And high amounts of slag make iron incredibly brittle when it gets cold. So here it is, the moment it all comes together. The iceberg didn't slice the Titanic open like a tin can, no. In that freezing North Atlantic water, those cheap slag-filled rivets became as brittle as glass. The bump from the iceberg was just enough pressure to pop the heads off the rivets one by one. The seams just opened right up, letting the ocean pour in. The ship literally unzipped. So, when you put every single piece together, you see the sinking of the Titanic wasn't really an accident, it was an inevitability. It was built from this long, interconnected chain of failures, and every single link in that chain was just as important as the last. This right here puts it all together. It started with design choices that put luxury ahead of safety. Then it was built with flawed, weak materials in the most vulnerable part of the ship. The crew made huge mistakes, going way too fast and basically blind into an area they knew was dangerous. Then nature served up a freak iceberg right in its path. And when the impact finally came, those brittle rivets failed, flooding way more compartments than the ship could handle and dooming the unsinkable ship. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if they just had the binoculars? What if that wireless operator had just passed on one more warning? What if the builders had just spent a little more money on stronger rivets for the whole ship? If you break any single link in that chain, there's a good chance history would be completely different. And it just leaves you thinking, how many disasters aren't about one big dramatic failure, but about a whole bunch of small, overlooked decisions that just happen to line up in the worst possible way?